Second Chronicles. As with First Chronicles, Second Chronicles is primarily written as a historical narrative, with its original title describing its contents as the events of the time or the affairs of the day. Originally, Chronicles was one book that was split into two in the 3rd century BC with the creation of the Greek translation called the Septuagint. And though there are possible suggestions as to the authorship, none have overwhelming support. Whoever composed it, though, did have access to a great number of court records, which are occasionally mentioned throughout the book. See if you can find them as you read along. The book is meant to encourage the people of Israel to place their hope in God and His promise, which is intimately woven into the Davidic dynasty. There's also an emphasis on temple worship according to the law and how critical proper worship is to the spiritual health of the nation. The emphasis is meant to remind them that their captivity was a result of spiritual adultery and disobedience and disregard of the law of God. Now, these ideas are clearly seen in chapter 7, verses 11 through 22, as the son of David, Solomon, is reminded by God that he will continue to be faithful to the covenant he made with his people. God warns of future judgment if his people forsake obedience to his law and worship other gods. But he also promises, in faithfulness to their covenant, to bring healing when they return to him in humble repentance. These judgments were something that the recipients might have had firsthand knowledge of. So the contents of 2 Chronicles lift up the faithfulness of God and his call to his people to be faithful to the covenant as they await the promised Davidic king. Now, at the highest level, the book could be divided into two sections, easily outlined, with chapters 1 through 9 looking at the reign of Solomon, and they encompass about a 40-year span. And then chapters 10 through 36 focus on the reigns of the kings of Judah, covering almost a 400-year span. Now, some have said that the first 9 chapters highlight the splendor that remains after the death of David, and chapters 10 through 36 highlight the disaster that Israel begins as she slides down the hill of spiritual unfaithfulness. The highlights of the book are the sons of David, those kings who exhibited at times a heart for God and often led to the restoration of temple worship to its proper place. While these kings were not the fulfillment of the promise of the Davidic covenant, they do show the display that God's statements to Solomon were true, that a Davidic king was important. A Davidic king who was devoted to the law of God was important to the spiritual health of the nation. Yes, God would bring judgment on those who turned away from him in disobedience and idolatry, but God would faithfully bring healing and restoration to those who turn towards him in humility and repentance. The book ends with a reminder to the people that they are experiencing the faithfulness of God to fulfill the promise he made through the prophet Jeremiah, where it was prophesied that Cyrus would issue a decree which freed Israel to return from captivity and rebuild the temple. As you probably gathered by now, the same themes that were important in 1 Chronicles are important in 2 Chronicles. These themes relate to the devotion of the people and the proper worship of God, the necessity of obedience to the covenant that the people have made with God, and the topic of having a heart that is directed to God, a heart that is humble, a heart that is repentant, and a heart that is submissive. Not a proud heart, or ultimately a heart that forsakes and abandons God. I hope you enjoy your reading of 2 Chronicles.